But this does indicate to many that this could be a transition period into another phase of the war. But like you said, senior officials have already stated that this war in total could go on for another year, essentially the entirety of 2024. And I think they meant that to message that this was not an end when it comes to these large-scale withdrawal forces.
The deputy political leader of Hamas has been killed in Lebanon in what's believed to have been an Israeli drone strike, risking a further escalation of the war in Gaza. Saleh al-Aruri, one of the Palestinian group's most senior figures, died in an explosion at a Hamas office in a Beirut suburb, which killed at least 6 people. Video from the scene shows a car in flames and an apartment building seriously damaged. Israel has not confirmed if it was responsible, but Middle East intelligence sources have told The Times that the attack was authorised when only Hamas members were in the targeted room and others had left. An Israeli spokesman has said whoever did it, this was a surgical strike against the Hamas leadership. Well, Mick Mulroy is a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. He was the Pentagon's top policy official for the Middle East and joins us now. Good evening to you, Mick.
Good evening, Carol. Great to be back with you.
Really
and
good.
Happy New Year.
And a Happy New Year to you, although it has got off to another cycle of violence in the Middle East. Just tell us, first of all, what you think of the significance of the death of Saleh al-Aruri in Lebanon.
Carol, al-Aruri was a significant player, if you will, and quite frankly, one of the founders of Hamas and their military wing. He was a deputy political leader, but he was also the leader of the military aspect of it in the West Bank. And I think he's been on, quite frankly, Mossad's list for quite some time. And he's been on the United States, not list for assassination, but there's awards for justice out there, and it has been for quite some time. So this was a substantial figure in Hamas, and I think it's pretty clear that it was Israel that carried this out. And targeted him inside Lebanon, as you said, and all the way up to Beirut. So this was a substantial effort. It probably took quite a bit of intelligence. And to your point, it may expand the war.
You talk about him being on Mossad's list. That, of course, is the Israeli agency. Now, Israel has been very careful not to confirm that it has carried out this attack. But you seem to be pretty clear that it was Israel that was responsible.
And I don't have any specific information about that, but it was clear from Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements, even public statements, that he tasked Mossad to track Hamas leaders down around the world and to essentially to eliminate them. So I don't think they're going to say it publicly because they don't want to rub that in the faces of those that wish they would have kept this more contained. But I do think it clearly has their fingerprints on it, and it's somebody that, quite frankly, needed to be eliminated. He was a substantial player, not only in Hamas, but from all media reports into planning the attacks on October 7th. And that, of course, is something that the Israelis take very seriously when it comes to eliminating those that plan that attack.
And we know that there are other senior Hamas figures who got out of Gaza and are in other parts of the Middle East, but still clearly playing a role in the way that the war is unfolding. Do you think we should see this attack as a change in tactic or even strategy, or is it all just part of that overall objective of destroying Hamas?
I think the latter. I think this is part of their strategy, which includes military operations, obviously, in Gaza, but also these more clandestine operations around the world. Now, I'd hope they wouldn't violate the integrity of a sovereign country, but when it comes to Lebanon, as you know, they have been violating the sovereign integrity of Israel for months now. They've been attacking, that they being Hezbollah, from inside Lebanon now for quite some time, and they're in violation of the UN resolution that's supposed to keep them off the border of Israel. So we've seen a lot of discussion from senior Israeli officials talking about how if they do not comply with that UN resolution, that they may be forced to do it, indicating they might actually take military action. And I think they saw an opportunity here to take out this Hamas leader, potentially without any other leaders. As you mentioned, they looked for an opportunity when there was only Hamas members there. And I don't think they necessarily want to open up another front, but I also think that they consider this existential threat to them, and they're going to do what they need to do to prevent Hezbollah from taking advantage of the situation.
Well, you talked about them violating another sovereign territory. I mean, that's clearly what Israel, if it was Israel, has done, isn't it? I mean, we've already had Lebanon's prime minister accusing Israel of trying to drag Lebanon into confrontation, and it's hard to see what authority Israel has to carry out a strike like this on another country.
So one way to look at it is that Hezbollah is a significant factor in the governance of Lebanon, and they almost nonstop attack Israel. So there is essentially already a hot war going on between Hezbollah and Israel. And again, Hezbollah has great influence not only in the organization that exists, but also inside the governing bodies of Lebanon. So I think Israel would argue, and they haven't acknowledged this, but they would argue that this is a continuation of a conflict that's already begun between the two.
We've seen a statement from Hezbollah, which is part of the government in Lebanon, saying that it considers the death of Aruri to be a serious assault on Lebanon, its people, its security, sovereignty and resistance, and a highly symbolic and significant political and security messages it contains. And Iran, which supports Hezbollah, has said that this will undoubtedly ignite another surge in the veins of resistance. I wonder what you think is likely to be the reaction to this strike.
So I do think Hezbollah has been very reticent to become fully involved. They understand what that could mean to them as an organization and to Lebanon. But there's going to be incredible pressure as the fighting in Gaza gets closer and closer to the military destruction of Hamas for them to do something. And this just adds to it. This was an attack. This person was basically the representative from Hamas to Hezbollah. He was in their territory. So this is going to put additional pressure on Nasrallah and his organization to potentially become more involved in the conflict and open up another front of this war, and not just one where they exchange indirect fire, but one that they actually have troops in contact with each other. Hopefully that doesn't happen. That's one of the reasons why the United States and the UK has put so many assets in the region, but ultimately it's not going to be up to us. It's going to be up to Hezbollah and their backers, as you say, Iran. And it's important to point out, IRGC essentially started Hezbollah, so their connection to this group is even stronger than, say, the Houthis or even Hamas.
I haven't seen any specific reaction from the United States yet. As you referred to earlier, the United States has been trying to, if anything, reduce the scale of the conflict. How do you think that the US is going to respond to this? Because it is an attack beyond the borders of Israel itself, beyond Gaza.
So, of course, the United States has had their own drone programs for many, many decades. And when it comes to areas where you can't get access to, such as in the past, the tribal areas of Pakistan, for example, we've used this as the only option that we had to get to terrorist organizations and their leaders that we needed to. So I think there will be a response likely from Secretary Blinken, who's going to be en route to the region soon, but it's probably going to be mostly behind doors, and it's going to be part of many discussions they have about the war in Gaza, the need to transition to a lower intensity conflict, and then, of course, what comes after it. This will just be one part of the U.S. desire to ensure that this conflict does not spread to a regional conflict, which certainly wouldn't be in the United States' interest, nor anybody in the region.
When we look at what's happening in Gaza, we saw the withdrawal of some Israeli troops. But at the same time, we had statements from those close to Netanyahu saying that this was to allow them to regroup and that the war was going to continue for many months. Are we looking at a new phase of the conflict, do you think? Or is this just a sense of a brief breather for some of the frontline troops before the onslaught continues?
That's right, Carol. It was about 5 brigades, and I think it was twofold. I think it does indicate to many that we might be looking at this transition from a full-scale combat operation with conventional forces to potentially a lower intensity intel-driven special operations counterinsurgency type operation. But it's important to point out that doesn't mean that the fighting is going to stop, and it doesn't mean that all the issues that you've already identified are not going to continue. But hopefully there'll be less civilian casualties and potentially more ability to bring humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The other part of this is many of those soldiers in those brigades are reservists, and they essentially have to go back to work. This has been very detrimental to the Israeli economy, and these civilians essentially need to rotate. So they might be calling out more reservists, but they have to train and then send them in. But this does indicate to many that this could be a transition period into another phase of the war. But like you said, senior officials have already stated that this war in total could go on for another year, essentially the entirety of 2024. And I think they meant that to message that this was not an end when it comes to these large-scale withdrawal forces.
Just one other development that we have seen in recent days is the allowing of a ship to bring in some humanitarian supplies. Until now, it's only the Rafah crossing has been the only route into the territory. But that is really not going to go very far when we look at the scale of the problems in Gaza, the warnings we've had from the United Nations of starvation amongst Gaza's population.
That's right. There is about 80% of the population or more that is unhoused. There is about 50% of the population that's on the verge of certainly food scarcity, but on the verge of starvation. And the medical situation is getting more and more dire as disease is spreading. They can't get vaccines in. There's a lot of issues. And I think they need to open up many more access points, which includes the maritime access point, because maritime, quite frankly, can bring in more supplies at a time. One ship that's being shuttled to shore can replace hundreds of trucks. So I think it isn't one or the other. I think they need to start opening points of entry in the mid and northern section and maritime, because as the fighting moves south, which it is, the Rafah crossing is going to be so contested and so violent down there that it's going to be very difficult to continue even the small supplies of trucks that are coming in from Egypt.
Mick Mulroy, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, really good to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.